Subscribers of mine were probably wondering why I played Mortal Online 2 in the first place, when the combat clearly lacks the sheen of Chivalry or Mordhau, so I'll begin with explaining why the game is so endearing. Within the MMO genre, Mode 2 is the last of a dying breed, hardcore sandbox with almost full PvP. Beyond the guarded towns, you can kill anyone you want and they can kill you, often with insurmountable numbers. When you die, you lose nearly everything you were carrying, which really gets the heart going when you're leaving a dungeon with a rare drop. Thanks to the close proximity that most combat encounters take place at, alongside the voice chat, players are often willing to cooperate to achieve a shared goal rather than instantly killing each other. That could involve forming a temporary alliance against a player-killing guild, or to take on the scattered NPC enemies that grant the usual XP and loot. These spontaneous meetings are always tentative, as any conversation can quickly turn violent. If your murdering spree goes too far, then other players can receive automated bounty hunt missions for your head. The scraping of a sword in town could mark the sound of someone coming to collect. All of these systems within the game encourage player interaction, as you can't do everything yourself, unless you have multiple accounts. You'll need to buy horses from tamers, gear from smiths, potions from alchemists, and each town has its own microeconomy. A rare book that drops in Tindrum's sewers will sell for 100 gold in Tindrum, but if you take the risk of transporting it across the sprawling map, you can get a significantly higher return. There's no fast travelling either, so journeys can be long and arduous, yet oddly enjoyable. The raw potential lying in wait here is palpable, and that vision is what keeps the remaining player base hooked. Despite the player count being lower than Mordhau, the realm still feels alive due to there being a single persistent server located in the UK. You'll bump into familiar faces and meet players from across the world. It's very quaint meeting Australians and Americans, and there's no confusion with your friends as to which shard to select, although I know for certain that if the chosen location for the servers was in America, I would not have attempted to enter this game due to the ping. Visions and potential often fall short, and Mode 2 is no exception. The elephant in the room is the combat, which also happens to be the endgame for anyone that isn't enamoured with the repetitive crafting systems or role-playing in towns. It's essentially a jankier version of Mount & Blade, a 14-year-old game that was surpassed with the release of Chivalry 1 in 2012. Mode 2 holds the trophy for best melee combat in an MMO. That's not a particularly impressive accolade. There is a skill ceiling, but it revolves around abusing the lack of any turn cap. Jump spin feinting is the norm for high-level play, and practically the only way to score a hit in an extremely defense-heavy meta. In the chaos of a teamfight, more straightforward strategies like target switching become effective, but any time you find yourself in a 1v1, you'll be forced to start conceding your swings again with the stupidest moves I've ever seen in any melee game. To make matters worse, at the time of writing, there isn't even a proper bind system for left and right swings, which apparently are on their way. Be warned, according to veteran players, many mechanics and features are in a permanent on their way status. My biggest gripe with the combat is the baffling decision to include handle hits. If the handle of a weapon hits a target, a glancing blow occurs instead of landing for full damage. You might expect this system to prevent players from excelling too hard. In practice, it does the exact opposite. To avoid handle hits, players excel to the fullest, as most sensible looking swings will merely glance for 0 damage. Essentially, every swing must either be the most ground-sniffing overhead or off-screen horizontal as possible. Fights haven't looked further away from fights than in Mode 2. Unlike in Chivalry or Mordhau, there's no quick offensive feint option, and scoring hits becomes a rarity, so to make the few hits that do slip through have a significant chance to do no damage is infuriating. The mechanic is seemingly present only to make the combat worse. Perhaps the developers were afraid of overloading the servers again if the gameplay became too popular. With any niche game suffering from poor design, you'll find a few poor souls that will defend their garbage combat system to the death, as if it were coded in stone, yet simultaneously they primarily use great blades with specific hilts, which in most functional games would be purely cosmetic, to avoid the handle hit mechanic as much as possible. Nearly all other weapon types are completely unviable due to this one mechanic. It gets worse. If you choose to take a fight outside of the sewers, you're more likely to engage in mounted combat, which is exclusively fought with unblockable projectile arrows or hit-scan magic attacks. Removing the ability to damage players whilst on horseback to force foot fighting would be the cleanest solution to these otherwise joke engagements of fat wheelchair mages circling you like sharks with their unavoidable 3-shotting spells. Unfortunately, the game is too entrenched with these cheese builds for radical suggestions like these to ever gain a foothold. The dawn of Chivalry 1, for many that touched it, spelled the death of traditional RPGs. Why should intricate levelling systems dictate the player's melee prowess when we've become accustomed to raw mechanical skill? Mode 2 has considerably less grinding than your average MMO, but there's still far too much for my liking. Not only are there 20 character levels, there's hundreds of skill options that require Skyrim-style levelling. As I'm writing this, my character is jumping up and down repeatedly via a macro to level its landing ability. Getting a viable build online, depending on how hard you're grinding, could take about a week, and then a further month or two to reach the max level. If we can appreciate that less grind is good, then surely we can agree to eliminate it entirely. Why should new players, of which there are very few until Clean started streaming the game, arrive at a significant disadvantage in terms of both mechanical skill and character stats? I recognise that seeing the level up text and getting a perk point is gratifying. I also see through it. A cheap thrill not dissimilar to the flashing lights and noises present on slot machines. Like Mordhau, many of the perk options are either essential or useless, and whilst there is some build variety, I could picture clades being reworked in exchange for raw stats and abilities for each race that are made instantly available. To that end, the primary skills could also benefit from faster levelling, as no sane player is going to cast Spurt on a target dummy thousands of times without the use of a macro. Mode 2 could go a lot further to respect the player's time. It's very hard to recommend to anyone other than the unemployed. If you needed further reason to avoid Mode 2, the Sword of Damocles hangs over the already low player count in the form of future subscription fees. Whilst this has been disabled since launch, it still features prominently in the Steam description. I dread to think how many potential sales have been lost from otherwise would-be buyers from this opening paragraph alone. The developers must be aware of this too, therefore subscription fees must be of the utmost importance for the longevity of the game. Yet there are clearly alternative monetization options that could be explored here, many of which can be combined with quality of life features, like multiple character slots or changing race, which is currently locked. These no-brainer options have been avoided for the sake of an overly idealistic goal, one character per player to maintain their reputation, but as previously mentioned, multiple Steam accounts with separate purchases of the game are common among the Mode 2 lifers, often to be law-abiding on one and a mass murderer on the other. Trying to fight against the inevitable is futile, and the developer's refusal to concede is concerning. Mode 2, with its over-reliance on UE store-bought assets, scuffed AI and overall jank, can simply not justify a AAA MMO subscription model. On its best day, it's a 1.5A, and I can't see that changing over the next few years. The community is extremely dedicated and simultaneously extremely hostile to the developers. Imagine the Mordhau community dialed to 11. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I suspect the introduction of subs for many would break the trance. Today's games are evolving creatures, and as such, so will my review. With the right changes, Mortal Online 2 could truly become formidable, not only within the first-person melee scene, but the gaming industry as a whole, and I'd gladly change my recommendation given the chance. The optimism of the developers and the clear love they have for their project is promising. However, the aforementioned issues, alongside countless others that are still leering a year after launch, makes me hesitant to suggest that Starvolt's vision will ever be realised.